This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
Sucks with these cold opens because sometimes I feel like I have this clever intro planned, and other times I have my notes typed up, and I'm sitting here at the beginning wondering, what am I going to try and start with to hook people in? I got nothing this week. I guess in this case, you get a howdy. How about that? Also, welcome to the Five Starr Wrestling Report. If you are watching on YouTube or Rumble, whichever platform you find yourself stumbling over to, either is fine. We have 2 weekly shows, Mondays and Fridays. If you happen to find yourself watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, like the show, leave a comment, all that good stuff down below. For today, we have our regular Monday format. We're going to continue along in our retro review series from 1993 on Raw, and we're going to cover this past Friday SmackDown show from St. Louis, Missouri, I believe, both of which had their ups and downs. Retro Raw was kind of boring, all things considered, as you'll come to find out as we review it. SmackDown had one legendary segment that we will talk about until the end of time, but all in all, not a bad weekend of wrestling. Got some other things I want to bring up at the end of the show as we kind of tie things over into the Friday podcast, but I'll cover that at the end of the show. So we had a very interesting Raw program from this day in history. I should have known how things were going to go as soon as they opened the program with Bash and Booger scarfing down what looked like to be food on television, although looking back in hindsight, I'm not entirely sure what the hell he was chomping on. Whatever it was, he missed his mouth for a lot of it. I'll tell you one thing, though. Watching Bastion Booger versus Razor Ramon in the opening match here, maybe you realize just how talented Razor was. Most people that wrestle Bastion Booger in the WWF, they'd be lucky if they could pull off anything between dreadful and revolting. Razor made this match with Bastion somewhat watchable. And trust me, that is a compliment. I think this was one of those rare moments watching a wrestling match on TV where I was actually glad they pitched a commercial shortly after the opening bell. Because the more of this they didn't air, the better it probably would have been for everyone's overall health. This was definitely one of those Scott Hall matches where if you just watch his expression throughout the whole thing, like, you'll definitely know what he was thinking having to work against this guy. All 400 plus pounds of him, 100 of which I think was the back hump. Booger could virtually do nothing here physically, and I mean that in the literal sense. Not that he would not do anything physically, he was pretty much incapable of doing almost anything here. He was sweating profusely when they came back from break, and before they pitched to the commercial, they literally did nothing here but a lockup. So either Hall was making Booger work during the break, or Booger literally got gassed out walking around the ring for 2 minutes. Hall spent most of the match here playing with Booger's tits and slapping his stomach. I was surprised he didn't try and pinch his back hump at any point. There was a point where Booger had Razor in a bear hug, and it was so poorly applied, Razor wasn't even bothering to sell it, probably to savor his credibility. And finally, after a few more minutes of Razor trying desperately to get anything out of this fat tub of lard, the finish is Razor getting backdropped off a Razor's Edge attempt, as if. And then Booger tried for a sitting splash, but Razor cradled Booger over in a sunset pin and won. I wrote down, if I were grading on a star system, I would give this one -7 stars. -8 if it took place in the Tokyo Dome. But because I don't do ratings, I will just say, this sucked many a cock. Then we had a Survivor Series report with Todd Pettingale, wherein he spent about half the session talking about the 1993 boxing rematch between Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield. He also did goofy comedy, which came off as about as Caucasian as you would expect a Todd Pettingale segment to come off as. And if you ever grew up watching Todd Pettingale in the WWF, you know what I'm talking about. But getting back to the wrestling side of things, here is where they showed the replay of the infamous Ludwig Borga-Tatanka match from WWF Superstars. Simultaneously, the end of Tatanka's career as we knew it. Not that he didn't stick around after the fact, but anyone that remembered Tatanka's career after the ill-famed job he did to Ludwig Borga, pretty much spelled the end of Tatanka's career in the WWF, at least in terms of ever getting a major push. Because from that point onward, he pretty much got the burial treatment. Which I guess was kind of fitting for the Native American gimmick. They had Borga use a chair on Tatanka behind the ref's back while he was arguing with Master Fuji. Fuji, who literally did nothing but stand in the aisle before the official confronted him. But they cut to the shot in the frame where Borga put one finger on Tatanka's chest, and that was how he was pinned. And while Yokozuna came out and hit the bonsai drop on Tatanka in the ring, the Quebecers also jumped Lex Luger, who tried to run out for the save. The Steiners, I had no idea where they were during all this, because this is obviously done as a hype angle for the All-Americans Foreign Fanatics Survivor Series tag match. I guess Rick and Scott were busy in catering at the time this was all going on. Like, they didn't even bother trying to run out to make the save. But, yeah. That was the first documented loss for Tatanka in the WWF. And not only did it happen on WWF Superstars, of all places, not even Monday Night Raw, but like I said, that poor guy never recovered after taking that fall to Borga. He mingled in the WWF for a few years after the fact. I remember he eventually turned heel when they were doing the whole $1 Million Corporation story. I can't remember if that was 94 or 95. Might have been 94 now that I think about it. Aside from that, really nothing ever came out at Tatanka from that point. He was there. He was sporadically factored into the mid-card picture. But it's another case of Vince losing interest in a guy and pretty much deciding he didn't want anything to do with him from that point onward. I mean, I'm surprised he stuck around a few years after all this went down. Like, I'd have thought Tatanka would have been gone at least by the end of 94. But no, he stuck the course all the way through 96 before heading back to the indie circuit. I think I recall he had a brief run in the WWE again in like the mid-2000s. But, I mean, that was way past his point of relevancy. And I don't think he stuck around all that long either. Kind of a bummer because, even if I was never a big fan of Tatanka as a kid growing up, I always thought they could have milked more out of his career. Probably not WWF champion material, but someone that could have been factored into the upper mid-card babyface role. I'd have maybe bought that. It's a shame it never came to be. Because the dude was over. Can't neglect that fact either. Anyway, getting back to the Foreign Fanatics thing, they were all in the ring for a promo segment, including Mr. Fuji, Johnny Polo, and Jim Cornette's hideously mustard-colored suit. And with the red dress shirt and shoes, he literally looked like fucking Ronald McDonald out there. I laughed so hard at that getup. And Corny got some verbiage in here, talking about the fact that Tatanka's out of commission because of what the heels did to him. So, with the stakes being 4-on-3 advantage heels, the possibilities are endless with how that match will turn out at Survivor Series. Johnny Polo spouted off some multifarious vocabulary that kind of went in one ear and out the other. That was followed with Borga saying some monotone material that put the retirement home to bed for the night. He hyped up a match with Scott Steiner next week, wherein he spent most of the dialogue talking about how Scott cannot read or write. To which I wrote down, maybe not, but have you ever heard Scotty do math? It's pretty fucking epic. And, well, that pretty much summed up everything. Corny put the heels over at the end. They all chanted, "Survive, survive, survive," over and over again. Except for Yokozuna, who just yelled, "Banzai!" Again, I laughed. Kurt Hennig had a quick squash against the Executioner, who I think was just Dwayne Gill under a mask. It was not Terry Gordy. Hennig beat him with a perfect plex, but I didn't want to take the time to point out the spot here where Hennig tried to put the jobber in a fake leg submission. Vince tried to refer to it as an Indian deathlock. I can assure you, as someone who has watched wrestling for well over 20 years now, this was not an Indian deathlock. Not even in the same stratosphere. It barely would have passed for a botched figure four. By the way, here's an interesting little tidbit. I believe this was Kurt Hennig's last ever televised match on Monday Night Raw. Because let's do some historical reconstruction for a minute. I remember he was initially slated to compete at the Survivor Series pay-per-view, but I can't remember what happened. I think his back gave out on him beforehand, which prevented him from getting back in the ring. Fast forward to 94, he does the brief WrestleMania 10 deal where he's guest reffing the Lex Luger-Yokozuna World title match. And I think that was the last time we saw Mr. Perfect in the WWF until 1995 after he came back from back surgery. So yeah, this is the last appearance that we'll see of Kurt Hennig probably until WrestleMania season next year. Boy, did that come up in a hurry. I had totally forgotten all about that until just now. Because I remembered off the top of my head that he was initially scheduled to work the Survivor Series card, but then nothing ever came of it. You know, it's easy to forget that this is sort of the wind-down period for Mr. Perfect as an in-ring competitor. You know, obviously he would still work occasionally for the WWF and even WCW in the late 90s. But as a full-time worker, 1993 was Hennig's last real full-time year as an active wrestler. I think the back injury was the catalyst, but you almost forget how quickly all that came up. Probably because you literally just watch Hennig here and you figured, another day at the office for Mr. Perfect. He was perfectly fine in the ring. No pun intended. But fast forward a few weeks later, he's pretty much gone until WrestleMania 10. Just like that. Completely vanishes. That's almost unbelievable if you don't have any historical perspective. He's there 1 week and pretty much gone for the better part of 5 months with no explanation. Crazy. I'll tell you who I wish would have been gone for the better part of 5 months. Or 5 years for that matter. Especially with all the ramming and force feeding we'd see of him over the next several years. We had a double J, double E, double T, B, apostrophe, asterisk, semicolon, double hashtag segment. Jeff Jarrett. Outside the Tootsie's Orchard Lounge in Nashville, doing his usual southern shtick of running down the WWF roster, talking about how he's still on his mission of being the world's best country singer. And this was actually a shorter than normal vignette, which was kind of a surprise. I remember these Double J vignettes droning on and on for like 10 months before it ever got to the point. Because, Jarrett was kind of notorious for doing that kind of stuff in his promos. Rambling on and on for eons about God knows what. So yeah, that was the thing. Double J's coming to the WWF. That's JEFFJARRETT. Jeff Jarrett. Then we had the Smoking Guns taking on the team of Well Done. I completely forgot about that fucking team. Did anyone else completely forget that there was a WWF job team at one point called Well Done? Timothy Well and Steve Dunn. I'm sure they were Russo favorites. Meanwhile, poor Bart and Billy Gunn are here doing this goddamn Wild Wild West cowboy gimmick. And amazing to think, in 2022, Billy Gunn is still riding on cloud nine with the scissoring and the daddy ass shtick. That man deserves an Emmy for career longevity. To think he bounced back from this? Good grief. I'll admit, I spent most of this match being surprised that Vince remembered which guy was Steve Dunn and which one was Timothy Well. Steve Dunn basically looked like a cross between the Ultimate Warrior and Dr. Tom Pritchard, minus the genetics of Warrior and or the ring ability of Dr. Tom. As expected, Bobby Heenan and Vince spend most of the match making well done jokes because, well, how can you not? I was shocked they actually gave this match so much time, and the fact that they gave Dunn and Well a lot of offense, or I guess to properly refer to them as well done. Get it? It's punny. It was kind of funny watching a green Billy Gunn try to make a fiery comeback on two underneath guys that were greener than he was. Lots of awkward-looking bumps. And after a very long, boring series of nothing happening stuff, right as things are starting to ramp up with Billy's comeback, the finish is Harvey Whippleman reaching in and tripping up Billy right in front of Earl Hebner for the blatant DQ. Because apparently it was very important to protect the team of Well Done in 1993 on Raw. Just couldn't have them do a clean TV job. No. Got to protect Well Done from taking falls here. Because they're going to the top, son. They're getting that monster push. And then, of course, the Guns just lay them out anyway and make them look like geeks. So that was a complete waste of 5 minutes. That was followed with a Macho Man call at the desk with Vince and Bobby, basically assuring that he will be on Raw next week, and if Crush decides to show his face, Savage will be all over him like ugly on an ape. He didn't use that exact line, but it came to mind. Oh, and Heenan cracked some jokes as Savage by making fun of his lacerated tongue, trying to get Savage to make thuffrin' thuckatash jokes. Bad memories with that line. But I guess we will see what happens with Crush and Savage on next week's show. After the Summit meeting a few weeks back, who knows what'll happen when those two are back in the same building together. And that brought us to our TV main event. Last week, I believe it was Diesel who got the main event slot. This week, they gave it to Adam Bomb. Pretty much throwing their hands up and saying, fuck it, this is what you're getting this week. And his opponent, who did not light the world on fire here either, Virgil. I think the joke pretty much writes itself. Virgil versus Adam Bomb in your Raw main event. You take a guess on how that all went. They did some choppy-looking chain wrestling air quotes around that. They almost completely botched a leapfrog attempt. And by that, I mean Adam Bomb barely got underneath Virgil for the drop down. They did some more stuff for a while that I totally spaced out on watching. And then Adam Bomb eventually went over with the Adam Smash. Or whatever he was calling the jackknife. Yeah. That was Raw for the week. Another one of those shows where some stuff happens and the reality starts to kick in by the end of it. Yeah, this roster kind of sucked back in the day. For all the shit I can give AEW for the bad booking and illogical crap that goes on most weeks, the one thing you will never hear me criticize about AEW is the lack of talent pool depth. I mean, they got some clunkers here and there, but when I look back at this particular Raw show, listen to some of the names I'm going to rattle off here. These are the guys that wrestled on Raw this week. Bastion Booger, the Smoking Guns, Well Done, Adam Bomb, and Virgil. Take out Kurt Hennig and Razor Ramon. Those were the alleged best guys that they could come up with to put a card together for Raw. In 1993. Epic fail. And that's not even taking into account the talk segment with Ludwig Borga and the rest of the foreign fanatics. To be fair, Yoko and the Quebecers were good workers. Borga, not so much. And that guy was blander than dry paint. But man, this talent assembly in 1993 for the WWF, no bueno. Tie that in with all the cartoonish gimmicks most of them were dealing with at the time. Makes the whole thing that much more cringe. So the show opened this week with the exact same group of guys that started last week. And if it had not been for the completely random music change for the Brawling Brutes, I would have thought this was a replay of last week's show. Not that it's a problem they started with the Brawling Brutes again, but I mean, it doesn't hurt to shake things up a bit. Anyway, the opening match is Butch and Ridge Holland versus Sami Zayn and Solo Sikoa, which was just about every tag match you've ever seen on television in the last 20 years. Again, not that it was bad. It just wasn't all that particularly interesting until the last 2 minutes. Obviously, after last week, they're playing up the injury angle they shot with Sheamus, talking about how he was at home recuperating with an arm sling, which was why he was not on the show tonight. The other thing, too, and we'll talk about this in a sec once we cover the finish, they had this short little pre-tape near Gorilla with all the bloodline, and Sammy's basically trying to tell Jey Uso that he doesn't need his help tonight and would prefer it if he just sat back and watched, which was highly ironic because then Sammy just let Jey come down to the ring with everyone else. It's like, what did Sammy think was going to happen? Think Jey was just going to go down there and play patty cake with the fucking commentators? So Sammy's apparently not too bright. And they had a pretty standard tag match per 2022 standards. A little bit of sloppiness, but generally it was fine. And the finish saw Butch set up Sammy for a moonsault, but Jey tried to reach in and pull Sammy out to the floor. And of course, Sammy got pissed at this. I guess the idea is that that we were supposed to buy that he was playing possum, which, okay, I guess I can buy that. It was funny, too, because while Jey and Sammy are bickering, Solo runs over and crotches Butch on the top rope, and it was perfectly filmed to where Sammy could just turn to Jey and go, "See, Jey? That's how you help a brother out." I have no idea why I found that so funny. And, well, the Jey and Sammy tension boiled over here so that the Brutes could take advantage and lay out everyone at ringside. And then when Sammy rolled back in the ring, Butch caught him with a small package for the three. So while the kids are all arguing in the ring, out comes Principal Reigns to put all these Utes in their place, including Paul Heyman, who once again always knows how to be Paul Heyman. And in the most WWE manner possible, at least that you would come to expect in 2022, not only do Roman and Paul come out while everyone is in the ring, but they also get their 15-minute grand entrance, pyro included, and when they're about halfway down the aisle, that is when they go to pitch to commercial. Because, got to make the advertisers happy. And for any of you that have made the constant jokes in WWE about guys standing in the ring during commercial breaks, literally standing there with dick in hand the entire time, or in the case of girls, I don't know what part of the anatomy they'd be holding in their hand. Either way, they're basically standing in the ring through a 2-minute commercial break, literally doing nothing but waiting. So sure enough, they come back from break while everyone is looking at the hard cam, and Roman is patiently waiting with his hands folded while Michael Cole and Wade Barrett are plugging the Saudi Arabia show, which takes about another 60 seconds of airtime. And then Roman finally gets to speak. It's just, it's hilarious. At the same time, it's also incredibly awkward to watch, even as a viewer. I can only imagine what the boys are thinking when they have to go through this. So anyway, while the recess kids are shitting themselves in the ring with Principal Roman running them down, telling them that they're going to settle this issue right here and right now like men, the only thing I could think the entire time is, Roman is a good father. I know he has a daughter. I don't believe he has any sons, at least in my recollection. But if he did have a son, that boy would be in good hands. My dad wasn't quite a hard ass like Roman was here, but the older you get, you always admire the button-down serious fathers. We need more of them today. So, God, this is just... Well, here's what I'll say. If you're going to do soap opera drama in wrestling, take note AEW. This is how you do this shit and make it look legit. At least I could buy that these guys are grown-ass men trying to hash out bad blood with each other, as opposed to the wimpy douchebags on the other channel that couldn't sell a convincing fight if their lives depended on it. You got Sami and Jay going back and forth on the mic here. Sami's trying to make peace with Jay. He doesn't know what his beef is, but he's sorry for whatever he did. Meanwhile, Jay's telling Sami that he's nothing more than a fake-ass oos, and it's really starting to look like the two are going to come to blows. But then Jay Uso, that poor sap, he done fucks up. Because Sami goes, the tribal chief says he wants peace. And Jay goes, I don't give a damn what the tribal chief said. And it's so perfect, like clockwork. This is so well executed. Like, you could not have pulled off a second take with this if you tried. Because as soon as Jay drops that line, the crowd all in unison goes, ooh. And at the same time, Roman, who had been pretty stoic the entire time these guys are going back and forth, had his back turned to everyone the whole time. He hears that Jey Uso line, and he lifts his head up and scowls. And now, Uso has got a problem. More likely than not, he's going to die. And it gets so much better because Sami tries to be the mediator by coming to the defense of Jay, saying that he's not himself right now. He's not being very Usy. Now, of course, I popped at that line, but if you watch too, Roman had to cover his mouth here because he actually started breaking kayfabe and smiling. And at the point where the crowd all started chanting Usy, I think Roman just gave up trying to hold back from laughing. He just let it out. That is one of those truly memorable wrestling moments that you look back at the end of the year and you remember it for being a great case of breaking kayfabe. whether or not that Usi line was pre-planned, it was so well placed that pretty much broke the fourth wall, and these guys weren't even trying to play serious heels at that point. I love Sami. He's so great. And you know that Usi line is going to be selling on t-shirts in no time. But trying to pull through with the rest of the promo because they had more material to cover here. God bless these guys for being able to keep a straight face through a lot of it. But Roman is giving Jay an ultimatum. He can either start getting along with Sami, or Roman is going to take that honorary Uce name that Sami's been awarded, and he's going to make him a full-time Uce, better known as Sami Uso. I actually kind of like the line Usi Zayn, but I guess Sami Uso works too. And to cap all this off, Paul Heyman actually did a legit commercial pitch. He plugged the Logan Paul-Roman Reigns match, and he legitimately said, "Now a word from our sponsors in 3, 2, 1. And they actually cut to a break. Is that a first in wrestling history? If so, that was a 5-star pitch. Applaud Paul Heyman for that. And, well, that was officially the greatest 30 minutes of wrestling programming I have seen all year. I don't think I'll ever forget that segment for as long as I live. The night that Sami Zayn got over the line Usi and managed to pop everybody, including Roman. You know those guys were laughing their asses off once they got to the back. I think I actually might go back and watch that again without taking notes, because that was the epitome of real sports entertainment. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it, Chris Jericho. Why don't you try some real sports entertainment for a change? Learn from the best. Quit trying to be a fucking cosplay knockoff. Then these bastards try to follow that epic bit of programming with a Maximum Male Models New Day tag match. And I said, oh, hell nah. Not in a million light years. Not until hell itself freezes over would I subject myself to that. Out of here with that hot garbage. So I went ahead and fast-forwarded a little bit. I caught the tail end of this Braun Strowman pre-tape where they showed him flipping over ambulances and pulling down steel gratings in the back years ago. To which the first thing I said, Strowman looked a lot better when he had hair. He also looked a lot more meaty several years ago, too. Now he's leaned out, shaved his head, and kind of just looks like your average generic bald guy with a beard. Anyway, he's apparently excited about fighting Omos at Crown Jewel, and he may be the only one. Said it was going to be a challenge for him, which, boy, is that the understatement of the year. Yeah, that'll definitely be a challenge for Strowman. Challenge to see if he can get anything remotely watchable out of that guy. Highly doubt it. So then we had a Ronda Rousey Open Challenge, which initially caught my attention because I figured, okay, maybe it'll be a surprise return or something. Anyone but Charlotte. And it wasn't Charlotte. It was not really someone I was expecting. It was Emma. Or I think she was going on the indie circuit for a while, Tenille Dashwood. Was that her name? Or am I thinking of somebody else? I don't know. I obviously remembered Emma from the good old NXT days. Wouldn't say I was ever a particular fan of hers. I never really thought she was all that good in the ring or on the stick, but I also set higher bars than most people do. Factoring in the most of what I ever saw from her was when she was in NXT. I gave her a little bit of slack because she was in their developmental program at the time. I mean, I figured she was going to be green. I don't know. I don't really remember anything of note she ever did on the main roster when she got called up. I remember at one point they tried to repackage her gimmick, and that lasted all of like a week before they just canned it all together, and then I think she just disappeared from TV again. I vaguely remember that whole scandal where she was apparently arrested for stealing an electronics case or something like that. And then after WWE had subsequently released her, they reinstated her shortly after her court hearing because she ended up paying for the case anyway. It's a weird story. A lot of murky details in there. And I don't know if this is a one-off appearance or if they actually signed her. If they signed her to a deal, it'll be interesting to see what they end up doing with her. Correct me if I'm wrong, isn't she in her early 30s now? Not to say that's old or anything, but typically speaking, women wrestlers statistically have shorter careers than male wrestlers do. Like, women wrestlers usually phase out from full-time roles in the business by their mid to even late 30s. So I don't know how much mileage they're going to get out of Tenille, depending on how long she's going to stick around. I'm not going to say she wouldn't have a place on the roster, but I mean, are there more capable and better female talents that WWE has at their disposal right now? Yeah, probably. I'd maybe have Tenille around to work occasional squashes, or maybe use her in a veteran-type role to help elevate some of the younger girls, because she's been around the business long enough. She has experience. Again, I've never been the biggest fan of her ring work necessarily, but she's not awful or horrendous in the ring. She's very pretty, too. I forget where she's from. Is it New Zealand I'm thinking of? Maybe Australia? I think Cole mentioned it here, but I wasn't paying close enough attention. The match itself was what it was. Emma was there to basically do the job, so she didn't really get spotlighted effectively. They gave her a little bit of shine at the end, but Ronda mostly stretched her around for the majority of it. And then right at the end, they did a spot where Ronda raked Emma in the eyes behind the ref's back so she could hit her with the Piper's Pit and then tap her out with an armbar. Did anyone else completely forget that Ronda was supposed to be a heel this whole time? God, after that insufferable Liv Morgan program over the summer, I just kind of made Ronda de facto babyface in my mind because of how much I couldn't stand the Liv Morgan push. And then I heard Ronda come out here and cut a heel promo and use cheating heel tactics to beat Emma, and is like, oh yeah, I totally forgot. Ronda is supposed to be a villain this whole time. Good to know. In the meantime, as we're trying to make up for lost time here, I may or may not have inadvertently neglected to watch this Legado del Fantasma Hit Row match. I may or may have not went to the restroom. I presume it sucked. What did not suck was the follow-up skit in the back with Paul Heyman and Roman Reigns, where Heyman is telling Roman that he was in synagogue speaking with a doctor who knows a doctor who knows Logan Paul's doctor. And while Heyman was speaking to said doctor who knows a doctor who knows Logan Paul's doctor, Heyman was informed that Logan had steel pins put into his hand at one point after apparently breaking it throwing a punch. And, well, the long and short of it is, Roman's not sweating Logan, but Heyman's trying to be the wise man and prevent Roman from turning a blind eye to the fact that Logan could hit Roman with a lucky punch at any time. And while Heyman is digging himself into a hole here by reminding Roman of the slim possibility Logan walks out of Crown Jewel as the new world champion, he also realizes that this is simultaneously pissing Roman off. So Heyman eventually dismisses himself, and obviously I can't do it justice because I'm not Paul Heyman, nor will I ever be Paul Heyman. Trust me when I tell you, this is fantastic. Not that anybody actually buys for a second that Logan Paul is beating Roman for the Universal title, but even the fact that they're hinting that it is possible and Roman is sitting here on his iPhone, totally unfazed by all of it, makes you wonder, what if they were actually stupid enough to take the title off of Roman and put it on Logan Paul, of all people? Closing in on, what are we at, like the 800th day he'd be his Universal Champion, and they decided that Logan Paul would be the guy to do it? Makes you wonder. It really does. Anyway, that was followed with a brief Eli Drake Ricochet deal in the back, where I think Ricochet just inadvertently got Eli over as God's gift to SmackDown, which he may very well be. Wish we could have actually heard the guy talk before Ricochet interrupted, because, well, that's kind of Eli's gimmick. He's a really good promo. Would have been nice to hear one. Then Karrion Kross beat Madcap Moss in a match that probably should not have been as competitive as it was. If Madcap was somebody that people actually took seriously as an upper mid-card babyface, I can maybe see him getting in a good amount of offense on Kross. But when you realize it is Madcap Moss we're talking about, you realize this probably would have been better off as an in-and-out procedure. Crowd was dead for it. It went through a commercial for Lord knows what reason. I was incredibly bored watching it. And then Kross eventually won by clubbing Moss in the back of the head. And then he did a promo on Drew McIntyre while he had Moss in a cross jacket. And, I mean, it was a fine little promo. Little hokey watching him cut it while Moss is laying there unconscious. Guess it made for a cool visual. You know, I think at the end of the day, my problem with the whole thing still boils down to the presentation of Kross right now. He came back with a lot of hype and leverage, and right around the point he showed back up, so did about 100 other formerly released guys. Now Kross is starting to fade into the background with some of these other listed names that recently showed up. Ideally, a feud between him and McIntyre should work. It's two big monster-looking men that can work. They're both intense. They're both working the right character roles right now for the feud. But I don't know. Something's just getting lost in the shuffle with all this. And I think the problem just might be Karrion Kross. I've talked about it before. It's probably the one thing that I think Dave Meltzer and I can actually agree on pretty solidly. Kross has always been a fine worker. He's always been a solid promo. But at the end of the day, fine and solid are just kind of placeholder terms for mid, without the negative connotation attached to it, I guess. It's not that Kross is untalented or anything, but, I think his run in NXT kind of put into perspective that unless he's being billed or pushed as the top guy, he can easily get lost in the shuffle when he's surrounded by guys that are bigger and better than him. He has a look. The hair is probably not doing him any favors. I always preferred the bald head when he had the goatee. It made him look more like a badass. But with the way Kross is being presented right now, what is he? He's a mid-card, arguably upper mid-card guy with average size in comparison to a lot of the other guys on the roster right now. His matches aren't really clicking. His promos are fine, but not great. He's kind of getting lost in the shuffle right now. And I don't really know how you fix that unless you decide that you're going to push him as the next world champion. Because, you can give him a belt if you want. Like, the Intercontinental title would probably be the best example. But then that just puts Kross in the second-tier position again. And I don't think that's going to help him. I've always been on the fence with Kross, and it's one of those unfortunate circumstances where it's not really him specifically. Because I like the guy. He's obviously talented. He's doing his job. He works hard. He does what he's told to do. He's dedicated to what he does. But are there other guys that can fulfill that same role and do it better than Kross can? Yeah. So it's kind of a sad reality. He's good, but is he unique? If he is, I haven't seen it blossom yet. And who knows if that'll ever happen at this stage. Because the guy ain't getting any younger. I don't know. Could be the Impact purgatory problem too, because, he definitely stood out when he was in Impact years ago. And that's sort of where people caught notice of him and said, this guy could be something if he went to WWE. But then you realize the comparison between Impact and WWE, and that's kind of the end of the conversation right there. Karrion Kross in Impact Wrestling is fucking John Cena. But in WWE, he's just not really catching the same fire. Just kind of the way I see it. And on the other hand, you have Bray Wyatt, who truly is a unique, one-of-a-kind persona that nobody else could replicate if they tried. Nobody has the charisma or delivery ability of a Bray Wyatt to be able to pull off what he says and does. Whether or not you like it, whether or not you're a fan of the hocus pocus BS, you cannot deny that nobody else in that company could work that Bray Wyatt role, except for Bray Wyatt himself. Or I guess Wyndham Rotunda, if we're going to use his Christian name. I still have no idea what he's talking about. I have no idea what the hell they're doing with this new character. I'm bound to probably hate it by the end, but I'm intrigued. If anybody else is going to try and fill that role on TV, I probably wouldn't feel the same about it. But Bray's material always has me captivated. It's hard to describe, but if you've watched wrestling for a long time, you'll know what I'm talking about. Those kinds of characters that just kind of suck you into what they're doing and just kind of leave you to suspend your disbelief. Even if you're on the fence about it and you're thinking, I don't like where this is going in terms of direction, but the character itself really jumps out at you because of his delivery, because of the way he carries and conducts himself. Bray Wyatt's that kind of guy. Speaking of the man, let's talk about the final segment here. I still don't like the Bray Wyatt theme, but I guess I'll have to swallow my pride on that one because they ain't going to change it. Not that it's a bad song or anything. I just don't understand how it fits the Bray character. There's that really cool piano riff at the beginning that's kind of haunting and spooky. It's an interesting motif, but once they bring in the rest of the band, like the chord progressions are generic rock or metal progressions. There's not a lot of dissonance or uneasiness about the melodic content, outside the chromatic piano lick at the beginning with the half-step movements. For anyone that's not a musician, no one's going to know what the fuck I'm talking about, but you get what I mean. But let's discuss the promo itself for what little I got out of it. Once again, dealing with Bray Wyatt, the man. Whether or not that's supposed to be in kayfabe, who knows? But he's not the cult leader Bray. He's not the masked fiend Bray. Just Bray. The realest version we're going to get out of him. For good or bad, we'll find out eventually. He's talking about how for the majority of his life, he's had trouble controlling his emotions. And now it's gotten to a point where he's been through so much in life. Now he doesn't really feel much of anything. And he's going on another one of his tirades before Uncle Howdy shows up on the big screen and does another spooky Halloween-inspired promo. And between the incomprehensible material and the weird vocal settings, I couldn't really pick up on anything beyond the Uncle Howdy stuff. There was also another QR code on screen, in case you're all trying to play along in the next set of Clue the board game. I know I'm probably going to hate this by the end. My inclination is telling me to start preparing myself for the worst case scenario, given Bray's track record. I'm not totally ready to shit the bed on it, but man, is it towing a fine line right now. There's an idea here, and I'm waiting for the actual execution of it before I make my judgment. Again, Bray's material has always been this way. I think the problem now is that we have enough historical perspective to realize that a lot of his stuff ends up turning to dog shit by the end, mostly because of the bad booking. Only reason I'm not going to give up on it completely is that Vince is no longer overseeing it. If he were still in the picture, I'd have probably turned away from this thing the moment they started airing the vignettes. So right now I'm shrugging my shoulders and prepping for the worst. Pretty much all I can say about it right now. Set the bar low, see how far they fall from it. It's kind of the way I see it right now. Overall, though, this is a pretty solid SmackDown. The Bloodline stole the show, hands down. Their material was outstanding, and I don't think I'll ever forget that promo segment at the beginning where Sami dropped the line of the century. Beyond that, though, there really wasn't a whole lot going on this week worth talking about in detail. The Emma return was interesting, I guess. See what they end up doing with her. I already kind of said my piece on Karrion Kross and Bray Wyatt. I think next week they're going to do Rey Mysterio and Gunther for the IC title, which I thought they were going to book for Crown Jewel, but maybe not. It'll be a fine little TV main event. And I guess that'll kind of wrap things up. Real briefly here, I did want to mention that I've been paying very close attention to the whole fallout with the CM Punk news over the last few days. I plan on talking extensively about it this week on the Friday podcast. Depending on how long I spend on the AEW report, we'll see where I want to include that in the whole discussion. I have plenty to say about it, and surprise, not a lot of good. But I think most people would agree that it's probably not a good sign either. Other than that, though, it'll be the regular Friday podcast with the Retro Series content, and we'll see what they have in store for Dynamite. That'll pretty much be it. Until then, take care all. Peace.